For those of you who are in from out of town or out of country, Target is a nationwide discount retailer with approximately 1,845 stores, 350,000 team members, headquarter locations in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and several other areas across the country. We want to take a moment and invite you now to join us at the Target Open House, which is our IoT and smart home showcase, located in the Metreon on the corner of 4th and Mission, right here in San Francisco. Drop by, say hi. And if you are not familiar, again, with what Target or Target does, our e-commerce website, target.com, receives a not insignificant amount of traffic every month. It's the 4th most visited retail website in the United States, but our retail presence, our .com website, is just one of our digital initiatives and part of our strategy. Our flagship mobile app allows you to easily purchase products from your mobile phone, convenient features like a map, the product you're looking for, of where you can find it in store, scan your thing before you buy it. Cartwheel offers you discounts with your red card to quickly check out. Get on with your busy life. New features like Drive Up and Shipped provide the convenience of having your purchases brought right out to your car or delivered straight to your door. And now that we are through with the awkward sales and marketing presentation, you should recognize that Target is essentially retail that is powered by technology. And what we want to do is talk to you a little bit about what our technology is and how we use it at Target. Take a glance at our agenda today. We'll be talking up front about what we want you to get out of everything, how we use Target with the Google Cloud, our journey thus far and some of our journey into the future, the challenges that we ran into, our expansion into Google, further into Google, struggles that we're still having and where we're looking at for the future. So as we talk through all of these things, there are a few items that I want you, that Rachel wants you to watch for, these top-level takeaways, please. Number one, organizing your resources at Google is, well, can't be understated how important it is in order to align those to how you want to manage cost. For example, you might be tempted to use a single project within which to store all of your applications or run all of your applications. That may work for you if you're a small mom and pop shop or even an enterprise customer, but we found that it doesn't work for us because we can't easily split resources to align with how we want to manage that cost. How you organize your resources, your org, your folders, your projects, your applications, the products inside of those projects has an enormous impact on how you look at your bill. Number two, organize all of these resources to leverage fingerprints where at all possible. Those fingerprints should align to how you want to manage cost. Fingerprints are going to survive the test of time as your organization changes, as ownership of an application changes, as code names for your projects change. And three, please don't listen to everything Google marketing has to say about how they want you to use a product. Forseti, for example, is pitched as a security tool, but we're using it to enforce the data integrity for our application fingerprints. All right. In order to start driving home some of these concepts, it's going to help, I think, to know why we think they're important. So maybe even important enough for a 50-minute talk. We'll find out. And that's going to require just a little bit of setup. Target has, as I just mentioned, almost 2,000 stores, distribution centers, warehouses, data centers, et cetera, nationwide. And there are select aspects at every single one of those locations such that that location could be considered a quote-unquote cloud environment across the board. We have infrastructure there. We have platforms there. We have applications there. And due to the geographic distribution and the sometimes limited connectivity based on where those locations are, each store, each site, I should say, is treated as a standalone, isolated cloud environment. You could call them, for lack of a better word, mini clouds, right? We also have our own data centers with similar resources. There's just a lot more of them, so maybe those are not so many clouds, not quite mega clouds. And then since we're giving this talk, it should be pretty obvious and should surprise no one that we also use public cloud providers such as Google's cloud. All right, we'll call them a mega cloud, that's fine. To us, and this is the most important part that I can get across in this slide, we want to treat all of these resources the exact same way. E pluribus unum, if I can, right? Regardless of the disparity in the infrastructure, we want apps runnable everywhere in the same exact way, the target way, not the store's way, not the distribution center way, not Google's way, but the target way. The infrastructure is all managed slightly differently, and that means that we need some sort of platform in the middle there between the infrastructure and the applications in order to be truly ubiquitous. So we wrote a thing, and we call it the Target Application Platform, or TAP. The idea is simple. Given every possible compute location that Target uses, the experience of deploying an application to any of those locations should be exactly the same. Now, if you were at the keynote this morning, you heard something from Google called, similar called Anthos. I think I'm saying that right. I frankly only heard it once or twice this morning. And TAP, I want you to know, we want you to know, just hit its 1-year anniversary 4 days ago and pretty much kind of does the same exact thing. So yay, Target. Okay. The intricacies of TAP's design, how we got there, why we did it, those are all the contents of another presentation. And that YouTube link, should you want to take a picture or take a look at the slide deck later, will take you to last year's presentation on the design of TAP that we gave at Google Next 18 in July. Or, if you have time this evening, you can attend Dev 217, given by some of my colleagues tonight at 5 p.m. All right, the bottom line, regardless, is that we have clouds everywhere, and we try to manage and want to manage what runs there all in the same exact way. So what does that mean for how Target uses Google Cloud? All right. We have two primary goals in leveraging any cloud provider. The first, we want to put the things that impact our guests, our customers, that's our term for guests, if you're not familiar with this parlance, as close to the guest as possible. And regardless of the kinds of workloads that we could run there, the things that make the most sense at any public cloud provider are Target.com, our mobile apps, the things that you, when you walk into a store, experience right then and there. And the second thing is that we want to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. And that kind of becomes a tricky situation and the point of the talk. Scale, public cloud providers all scale. That comes for free. Google does it better than everybody else. I'm biased, anyway. But even if we weren't using TAP or any other sort of Target custom-built tool to deploy our workloads out to Google, putting stuff out at a cloud provider, it's dead easy, right? But making sure that we're using it in the most effective way possible, so much harder than we thought. So much harder than we thought. You probably do. In fact, I'm just going to pause from the script here. Who thinks that it's hard to track how you're using your applications out of Google by a show of hands? Right? Okay. Well, take 20%, 10%. That's all right. Boy, that makes me want to ask why everybody else is here. Even if we weren't doing that, it's super hard. So why? Why is it hard? Some of that is based on the choices we've made, and some of that is, frankly, based on the structure of how Google does things, of how we've chosen to use Google, and of how Google allows themselves to be used. We'll talk about both.
So billing is a hot topic at Google, right? We're talking about money here, and it gets a lot of visibility. So it gets a lot of questions with it. Questions from senior leadership to our finance teams, all of the infrastructure teams that deploy managed services on Google Cloud, and then all the way down to the application teams that deploy their apps on Google Cloud as well. So we can kind of break these questions into two different categories. Reactive, right? So I get the bill, and I'm like, holy crap, why is this so big? What am I spending my money on? where are these services coming from, right? Storage, compute, databases, logging, or something else. And then there's proactive, right? How do I know if this is a good number? Is it too high or is it too low? Or is this just bad, right? How do I be more effective in what I deploy on Google Cloud? How do I understand how to be better? How do I understand how to lower this number? And so there's one question that I want you to think about every time we talk about something up here, every time you're going to make a decision on a tool or a service. And that is really, how do I provide the most information that teams can use in order to make better decisions? I'm going to hit the next slide here. Yep. So we're going to talk a lot about things that we've done in the past today, things that we're currently doing, and then things that we want to do in the future. And I'm going to pause a few times, and I'm going to ask this question. And based off of the answer, that's how we're going to decide on what we're going to do.
All right. So there's a long journey to put stuff out of the cloud. The larger the enterprise, likely sometimes the longer the journey is. But whenever you start on any journey, your own personal experience is going to tell you that there are things that you can be pretty sure you're going to run into along the way, right? Some of those things you'll know exactly what to do about it before you even get there. You know you'll just have to deal with the front desk clerk at the hotel, and you can't change their attitude, and life is just going to suck for those first few seconds. So you're either going to just have to deal with it, climb over that hurdle, or go around it somehow, right? We can't control the weather, but we can certainly take a look at the forecast and dress appropriately or bring an umbrella. But there are also things on any journey that trip you up along the way and knock you flat on your face when you're not expecting them to happen. When targets first started moving workloads into Google, we did not do it in a big bang kind of way. It was piecemeal, a little bit at a time. We were inching our way in while migrating out of another cloud provider. We knew some of what we were walking into, and we very much unknowingly brought a whole ton of baggage with us. Billing was absolutely not a primary thought, but it was there, right? We want to know, we want to be able to control it, but it wasn't a primitive. It wasn't considered something that was key when we started this journey. So this piecemeal method unfortunately led us to making some decisions and choices that made sense at the time, that later turned into the kinds of things that you trip over because you didn't see it in the path and makes you fall flat on your face. And some of those things made sense at the previous provider, like a singular project. Made sense there, doesn't make sense here to us. At Google, all of a sudden, we were thrust into a situation where we had to give better information to our developers, and we weren't well equipped to do it. Everything's a journey, though, right? You've got missteps, you've got backtracks, you've got bridge buildings, par for the course. So let's talk about some of the things we saw before we ever started this migration. Let's call them big rocks. These are the things you know you're going to run into. At Target, we're absolutely not going to be able to change the organizational structure of our company from the ground up to suit what is possible at a given cloud provider. So we need a way to identify a resource and have that reportable at every level of the org. That rock, we kind of chose to ignore going in, even though we knew it was there. We didn't treat it as a primitive. Don't make that same choice that we made, please. Secondarily, while most companies actually split up their bill and pass that along to various parts of their organization, either for direct payment or internal transfer of funds, Target takes that bill, splits it up, and shows every level of our organization what they've spent, but we don't expect any payment in return for that. One part of the org is responsible for paying all infrastructure costs associated with that provider. And that part alone is responsible for the cost control associated with that bill. So we all share responsibility, in summary here, we all share responsibility in contributing to that bill, but only one party is accountable to its management. And that can be a problem. Imagine you're an application team, and you're sitting there and people are telling you spend less. Why do you care? You are neither accountable, it doesn't impact you financially, it potentially impacts you technologically to change the way that you're running your application. Why do you care? We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but just keep in mind that we have no carrot or stick to change a team's decisions about how they use their resources at Google. And lastly, that last bullet point, bring your own Kubernetes. We knew from the very, very beginning that we would not be using GKE, but bringing our own Kubernetes clusters to Google Cloud. If you're familiar with Kubernetes, either older versions of GKE or some of the more recent versions of Kubernetes native, you know that the idea of shared resources is great from a compute efficiency point of view, but tracking who used what when can be kind of hard. So we knew up front we were going to need a way to apportion our Kubernetes VM bill such that we knew how a namespace was being used in a relatively accurate way. All right, so these are the things that weren't going to change when we moved our workloads to Google. We still have to know how we're going to climb over these rocks and achieve what we want to achieve. Turns out that every big cloud provider also has their own big rocks that you absolutely can't change. At Google, one of those is labels. Remember, we want the holy grail of enabling these teams to make their own better decisions. Labeling, very popular way, not new, to add more meta information to your resources. And they even end up in billing exports, which if you spend a lot of time in them is so fantastic. You've got attributions to send back, life is great. But there are products, like Stackdriver Logging, that records information coming in from resources like HTTP load balancers that can be labeled, but the resulting logs from those resources cannot be apportioned even though they have their own cost associated with them. For example, in this screenshot, cloud HTTP load balancers, there is in that particular resource, the log that is load balancer logs cannot be labeled. But remember, we also have one project up front. All of our applications are sharing this log source. How do I find out that application A is largely responsible for 50 or more % of all of the costs going in there and give that team accurate showback? Help them manage themselves, right? Remember, we started with that single project and we just kept moving new applications in. So the more apps we had, the harder it became. And now let's talk about some of the tripping stones. All right, I think that they came in 3 different kinds of categories. First, there are things that we knew we'd be creating tech debt for, but if we did it a certain way. But we did it anyway, thinking to ourselves, oh, we'll deal with it later. Okay, now I want to show of hands. Who does that all the time? Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. You are lying if you do not raise your hand. That's fine. The second category is that we couldn't do it the way that we assumed we could because of either a misunderstanding or some reason or another about our interpretation of the docs or the way the docs were written or who knows what. And the third category is that we didn't know we could do it, or we didn't know that we had to do it in order to get that piece of information. Okay, so let's talk about some of those items. At our previous cloud provider, for example, we had established a naming convention such that an app and component combo would uniquely identify the application utilizing a resource. So that would even address certain security startup problems. Like, let's make sure that if you are not a registered application or a registered component, we're not going to allow you to read these secrets out of our platform. We're not going to allow you to read these key value pairs. We're not going to allow you to register your services. And because, let me back up just one moment and give an example. Think about application and component. Think about price as an application. And within price, we might have an API. We might have a Redis component of these things. They all roll up to this price application. But everything's got their own component. This is legacy. This is previous cloud provider. But did you know that application teams love code names? for what they write. OK, at least I see some smiles. This is good. And what happens when those code names change? What happens when a new leader comes in and says, I don't want to own that product anymore, give it to so-and-so? All of a sudden, the application still exists. The product still exists. The components may change, but it no longer rolls up to the same portion of the organization. And that's not good. That's not good for tracking cost over time. The first apps that we put out at Google only used compute and network resources. It's important to know, because maybe this is partly defensive to say, we kind of knew it might happen, but that's all right. There was no BigQuery, there was no Stackdriver, there was no anything except compute and network, because, remember, we wanted an agnostic way to be able to use those primitives that every public cloud provider offered in order to have our platform be agnostic and deployable to any location. Putting ourselves into a single project totally made sense at the time, but how do you divvy up those things?
Alrighty, so some of the challenges that we faced. This is just a basic output of our billing data flow looks like, and it should look pretty similar, right? You go into the Cloud Console, into the billing section, and you hit Export My Data. It all goes into a Google Cloud Storage bucket, and then it gets sent into BigQuery. From there, we created a handful of views so that we could actually visualize this data in a different tool. And the two tools that we primarily used were Data Studio and Grafana. And just for reference, Data Studio is a Google product, but it is not a Google Cloud product. However, it is very easy to integrate the data between the two. And then Grafana is just another visualization tool that Target uses as part of our measurement platform. So this is what the billing data flow looks like. Two big caveats that I want to call out is that first, our teams don't have access to actually go into the Cloud Console. They don't have those IAM permissions. We use other tools to actually deploy, such as Spinnaker, or for teams that are deploying containers, you can choose directly from the command line. So that kind of posed a problem when we wanted to use labels, right? Because labels was an option, but it wasn't enforced, it wasn't regulated, so therefore teams just didn't do it. So that was the first challenge that we really needed to figure out, is how do we go through and apply those labels when teams aren't doing it themselves? So our short-term solution was to write a script that retroactively goes in a couple times a day and looks at all the new instances that are created, grabs the instance name, and then applies that name as a label under a key-value pair. So we had the key as something like finance tag or application, and then the actual value of that would be the actual instance name. So first caveat. Second caveat is, so I'm forgetting some of my notes here. Let's move on. So this is an example of the Data Studio dashboard that we had initially created. As you can see, this is the price application that Ron mentioned a little bit ago, and you can see the components here: API, Redis, Solar, Cassandra. The actual design is not what I really want to talk about. It's not the meat of this presentation. How we filter, how we group everything together is what is important here. So we use a feature that is within Data Studio itself called filtering. And since it is not coming from BigQuery, all of these filters that we apply are all manual. So for each application team that's deploying into Google Cloud, we created a new dashboard for them. We created a new filter for them. And so, as you can imagine, as our teams grow, as the applications grow in Google, it gets really cumbersome, because for the initial migration, the 40 or so applications that we had, it was more of like a mental list in Ron and I's mind. All right, we know the price application team. We know who owns it at a broader level. But when you start having teams that change ownership, or they start changing code names, and for reference, everybody loves to put the word red in every of the code names we have, so you've got 20 reds somewhere. It gets really cumbersome. It gets really manual. It's something that can't scale with all of our apps. Now, another problem. This is just for teams that are directly deploying on virtual machines. Ron mentioned that we brought our own Kubernetes clusters, and roughly about half of the compute that we use are actually Kubernetes clusters. And those Kubernetes clusters are essentially virtual machines in compute engine, right? So that label that's getting applied to them, they're all getting tagged as Kubernetes master or Kubernetes node. And when we need to actually go down and break down that usage and see who's using what, it's something that we can't do with Data Studio. So that leads us to a different dashboard. Now, this is a tool called Grafana, which I mentioned before is part of Target's measurement stack. And so what we ended up doing is writing an API that goes in and grabs the total number of CPU and memory requests per namespace and assigns a relative cost compared to the total number of CPU and memory requests per cluster. And we got the total cost of the cluster from those labels that we were using, since it's still getting tagged here. Now, this dashboard and the one that I just had before roughly show the same thing, right? The breakdown per application over a period of time and per environment. We've got both our test project and production project as well. Now, what if you're an application team and you're deploying both containers and virtual machines? One of the questions that I always got was, well, can you just show me one number? Like, I don't want to have to go to 2 different places. Like, I know it's super simple, right? And so we did the most high-tech thing we could think of, and we sent all of this data into an Excel spreadsheet on a manual basis, on a weekly basis. And just so you know, I still get asked for this spreadsheet today, and we did this 2 years ago. So just to recap, all of our virtual machines that were getting deployed were getting tagged with labels, and that was going into Data Studio. All of our Kubernetes deployments, our container deployments, were getting tagged using that API and breaking down by namespace, and that was going into another visualization tool called Grafana. And since we split the two up, we had to marry them back together in this Excel spreadsheet. That alone is a number of problems that I don't even want to get into, and I'm sure you can guess what those are. But at this point, we're just tagging compute, right? I mean, granted, compute is a huge percentage of our bill, like 80 or 90% at this point, but we're largely ignoring every other cost. I mean, we had a handful of cloud storage buckets. We had a handful of Cloud SQL instances, and for both of those cases, those things can be labeled and tagged. And we were just ignoring them. We labeled it as like an overhead cost and moved on. But then we had all these other things too, like the Stackdriver monitoring and then certain networking costs that can't be tied back to an instance. And then one last problem is that this is just a test project and a production project. Granted, they were the 2 largest projects within our entire org, but we had a handful of other projects that were proof of concepts or for testing reasons that we were also ignoring. So this initial migration into Google Cloud, again, like I said, it was about 40 or so applications. We were tagging most of what we could. But let's think back to that first question that I asked everybody, right? Does this provide information that teams can use in order to make better decisions? Can I look at one of these dashboards and say, I know that's a good number, or I know that's bad, or I know that's too high, or I know where my waste is? And the answer is still no.
All right. I want to mention briefly something that Rachel mentioned, and that's all of the unallocable costs that came out of our first pass. She said that they have a tendency to just kind of be dismissed or assigned to the platform team incorrectly, namely our teams, such that it looks like we are 10% of our entire total bill, when in fact we're probably 1% or less. We just have everything that isn't allocable. All right, anyway, thus far in our journey, Target had chosen to run only non-commerce workloads related to Target.com at Google. Some of that was in support of mobile, some not. These workloads are all about the public information that's available on our website. You go to the website, you browse, you see a price, you see an item. Those are API endpoints that is not secret. There's not a ton of security that we need to put out there around those kinds of controls. But that security, relatively simple in comparison to what we were about to undertake. So in July of 2018, we started to migrate our commerce workloads to Google Cloud. And that, of course, came with one huge new big rock: regulatory compliance. Anybody? Yeah, OK. We've got, yes, this is a problem. Definitely from security. So we knew we needed to look at organizing our resources a little bit better to be able to manage that regulatory compliance easier. And we had a chance to apply at least some of what we had done to fix some of those pesky little tripping stones that we had tripped on: project naming conventions, application code names, and more. So let's take a look. Get out your phones. This is the one that you want to take a picture of, right? And the second or third to last slide as well. This is from our colleagues that are presenting Networking 200, a year in GCP networking. Unfortunately, that talk is happening right now. Please don't get up and leave. In another room. But similar to the talk that is happening right now, the same colleagues are giving a talk on called Architecture 208, 70 days PCI compliance to production with a hybrid cloud. That's right, 70 business days using this design to get all of our commerce workloads out there. And one of our presenters is sitting here in the front row with a big, wide smile going, tee hee hee. All right, let's talk about some of the lessons here. For our purposes today, I want to be able to call out some huge benefits of this design that translate into tracking better billing costs. First, we learned that leveraging every available capability of a shared VPC is a no-brainer. One of those capabilities is putting resources in one project within an organization, but allowing communication to happen between the projects using a shared subnet, for example. Define all the subnets in one area, but define the actual resources in each of the compute projects or in their own project. I should refer to the notes. Specifically, I say, the subnets there and the compute engine resources in their own projects. So what does this do? Now when a team spins up a compute resource, it's in a project assigned to that team and only that team. Yay! But Rachel's going to talk in a little bit about how that's still a problem. Number two, platform components that were previously getting all of the unallocable costs. Look, we've got our own project now, and we get treated just like every application that's out there. So that's good. And we get project-level IAM all of a sudden that we didn't have before, that we had to build our own security around and was just nasty. Third, app teams can consume now Google-specific services, and their usage gets attached directly to that project that's allocable to that team. It doesn't matter that they're using something that can't be tagged anymore, right? Maybe. Everything in the project belongs to them, but maybe it still matters that we can't tag it. 4, quota management. Oh, wow. I'm sure our partners at Google were very, very happy to stop getting our phone calls about we need another 2,000 instances raised in our production environment, or give us another 10,000 this, or we need more load balancers. Who the heck knows what? But regardless, there is still a problem here. Every application team could be putting more than just their application into a particular project. Rachel's going to talk about that. We need some sort of better identification. So back to our second highlight from our second takeaway from the top of the slide deck. Lowest common denominator. So introducing the configuration item ID. Yay, ITIL users, everybody who follows ITIL, life is great. It's an 8-digit unique number across all of Target's business units. And you remember at the beginning when we were talking about TAP, the goal of TAP is to deploy things the Target way across our fleet. It is not the store's way, not the Google Cloud way, the Target way. CIs, a target identifier. Lovely. They are our lowest common denominator. And what if we could apply them to everything at Google? Great idea, right? Except it's not a new idea. A lot of you in the room are going, yeah, we do this already. This is fine, no big deal. But our additional challenge is if an application team has no financial responsibility to tag their stuff or voluntarily tag their resources, how do we leverage tech to do it for us? How do we enforce or at least manage the data consistency? How can we ensure complete coverage of all of those resources at Google? Hello, Cloud Functions. Again, maybe not a new idea. We ask our teams to label their resources, but if they mess it up, if they screw it up, that's okay. We have Cloud Functions in place for the launch of every compute resource that allows for the sanitation and standardization of the configuration item data. If teams don't supply a CI at all, that's okay. What do we do? Well, if we really care to, we could have that Cloud Function prevent that instance from starting up and just say, Our security teams really like this idea, by the way. But since it's really about making infra easy for app teams to consume, that seemed a little extreme. So how do we track this? Hello, Forseti. It's pitched as a security tool, but at its base, if you're not familiar with it, it's just about finding deviations from a desired standard. We run reports to identify things that can have labels, but don't. Things that have a misconstrued label that indicate that we need to have better logic inside of our functions. Notification is manual for now, but there's nothing stopping us from spending some time and throwing out, taking our best guess at who actually owns that application and automating a report to be sent back out to them. We also have some pretty crazy ideas about making that back end more robust and automated that involve PubSub, that involve Stackdriver monitoring, that involve cloud tasks and even machine learning to help us be even smarter about these decisions. While you're here this week, keep a close eye on alphas, betas, GAs being announced. I've been scrubbed from talking about the programs that we use, but there are exciting things on the horizon that will make some of the challenges that we're talking about and mentioned in the last few slides all of a sudden very, very easy.
Alrighty, so we've got these configuration items that we're now applying to everything in Google Cloud. Ron and I are thrilled because that means the end of all that manual filtering that we had to do in Data Studio. And instead, you see a dashboard like this, where at the top you can drop down and choose your specific configuration item, or perhaps a cluster of configuration items that apply to your application. And you can also drop down and select your specific project that you want to see, and you can see all of the data that you could see before. In this case, we're showing compute. It's also tagging cloud storage. It's tagging Cloud SQL. Everything that can be tagged is getting tagged. Yay, right? No, that's not what happened. So some teams took our advice and they started tagging different components with each different CI or configuration item. Other teams just kept on doing what they were doing before, and they used the same configuration item across all of the components in their application. Other teams who managed multiple applications used one configuration item across multiple applications. So this didn't work, right? We wanted to be able to break down our costs even further. We wanted to be able to allocate where the spending was coming down even further, but that didn't really happen. And again, we still don't really have a way of providing real-time increases and decreases as teams make updates to their infrastructure, which is something that was been on the back of our mind, something we wanted to do, but we still hadn't quite figured out. So we kept our old dashboards. We kept all of the manual filtering, even after we kept growing our footprint at Google. I mean, we started with those additional 40 apps, and we've grown beyond that now, and we still have these manual filters. Although I guess the nice thing is that once you build them, you're done, right? You don't have to go in and change them or anything like that, hopefully, and assuming teams don't change their names or ownerships. But if you look at this dashboard, it's slightly different than the one that I showed you before, and that's because we edited our filters just slightly, so we showed beyond application-component. At this point, we're showing different versions of components. You can see here for price, their API, they've got a version 1 and version 2. You can also see that they're in multiple regions, so we've got breakdowns by region as well. And essentially, these are the instance groups that are getting deployed, right? I mean, initially, we were grabbing the instance name, and that's where that label comes from. But at this point, we're able to group by instance group now. And most of our apps use instance groups to deploy rather than just deploying a single instance at a time.
Can you talk about why that's important before we move on? I mean,
Why?
All of this is, if a team wants better information to make more information to make better decisions,
Yes.
how are they ever going to know that version 2 of an application is performing better and using less money than version 1 if we don't have this?
And that's what these dashboards did, right? So you can see that they've got multiple versions deployed, and the versions might be different, right? They make an update to their code, they make a different modification or something, and they redeploy, and we can monitor now. We can see the changes, we can see the disparities between the two, and they can decide which one's better. So where does that leave us, right? Let's think back to that initial question. Does this provide enough information that teams can use to make those better decisions? The answer is still no, unfortunately. Right? We're not providing enough information, right? It seems like cost data just isn't cutting it at this point. And so as we looked to expanding these dashboards beyond Google Cloud, right, we wanted to integrate all of our other platforms as well, potentially all of our managed services. We really had to figure out why the answer to that question kept being no. And that's where we come up with different kinds of information, specifically capacity and efficiency. So we're going through. We're tagging all of this other information, right? We're looking at capacity, the total number of VMs that I've got deployed. And we're looking at efficiency, right? So of those 100 VMs that I might have just deployed, like, what am I actually using? Am I at 5% utilization? Am I at 10%? Right? And those numbers are what we can start conversations with. And obviously, you're all familiar, like, for capacity, like, I closely relate it to cost, too, because I spin up 100 VMs, that's my total capacity, that's total allocated number of resources that I've got, and I pay for that, right? I pay for what I've spun up, and I don't pay for what I actually use of that. So that's really important when we're talking about, managing costs and eliminating operating costs and everything like that, because that starts that conversation with those app teams so that we can make them more, not reliable, but make them more cognizant of what their spending is. And again, like I said, we really wanted to expand our cost dashboards across all of our platforms. And so now, by combining the 3 kinds of information, we can. And we can also target our managed services as well. And so when I say managed services, we've got a couple different infrastructure teams that provide services for application teams to use, such as database tools or measurement tools. And historically, every database cost was attributed back to the database team, even though a bunch of application teams were using those databases. And so now what we can do with this information is actually tie it back to the application team that's using it. So where does that leave us going forward? This is a pretty new initiative at Target and something that we're still building out. But essentially, what we want to do is capture allocation, utilization, and cost data all together, right? All of it. It's a ton of data. And at the deepest level that we can. So for some of our platforms, it's all the way down to an individual host or server. Others, not so much. Just really depends on the platform. But we're going to export that data. We're going to start publishing it so that teams can actually see it. But before, it was just for our infrastructure teams, right? I could go in and see what my platform, like the utilization of it. But I didn't share that with the application teams using my platform. And so that was really a change of how we did things. So we're exporting all of this data either via Kafka topics or an API. We're still kind of understanding and identifying what the best practice is for long term, especially as some of our platforms are a little bit more modern, and then some of them are a little bit legacy in our data centers. So we really just need to figure out what the best way is. And then we're ingesting all of that data in a single place. And it's all getting aggregated on our big data platform, which does live in our data centers. We're working with our data science teams to build a couple of views so that we're not sending all of that data somewhere else, right? We're just sending what we need. And we're displaying it on a single dashboard that you can export that data into a CSV if you need it to get that fine level detail. But essentially, this dashboard, if I were an application team, I can go and say, here's my configuration item, or here's my application. And I can see everywhere that it's deployed. I can see the total allocated resources that I've got for that configuration item, or for my component, for my app. I can see the actual CPU and memory utilization of that. And then I can see if we can provide it attributable cost. If anyone are familiar, it's really hard to determine specific costs for apps that are deployed in data centers. It's really easy for Google, because I get a bill every month. But for our data centers, it's not the case. So, favorite question. Does this provide information? Can a team go into this dashboard, see information, and make a decision based off of that? And finally, we think the answer is yes. We hope so. Again, like I said, we're still kind of building out this whole dashboard and what it looks like. But we have been sending it out to teams, and it's been providing a lot of great results already. And it really helps us start those conversations with teams that might be oversubscribing, or they might be over allocating resources to themselves and then not using it. And so it's just a way for us to be a little bit better in efficiency and capacity. So just to recap, we talked about how we organize things and why it didn't work for us, and then we talked about how we did it differently, right? And don't want you to be afraid of changing the way that things were, assuming you can. We talked about the common denominator, that configuration item. It didn't work for us great in Google Cloud, but it's something that was a standard across Target. And so if you were to go and request new resources for something in our data centers, like, you are required to enter in that configuration item. That is a standard practice across all of our platforms now. And so teams know what it is. They know they're expecting it. They know they need to do it. And then the products. For SETI and Cloud Functions, they're not used for billing. They weren't marketed for billing, but we're using them for that anyways, because we're making it work for what we needed it to do.
Ubiquitous compute platforms require ubiquitous billing platforms.
Yes. Ron mentioned the target application or TAP, right? The idea was that regardless of where you're deploying your application, you go to one spot and everything you need is right there. That's the same approach that we wanted to take with billing too, right? Just you go to one spot, everything is there that you need. You don't need anything else. And with that, we just love to thank you.
Thank you.
Exciting, yeah. Thanks.